Was there, I mean, I don't know if you're even allowed to talk about this. I was wondering if there was there must have been some disagreement. Hi everyone, welcome back to Poetology. This is an interview with the poet Daniel Sluman about his collection Single Window. We talked about disability poetics in the UK, his collection in particular, and also had a conversation about the shortlist and the winners of the Forward Prize for which he was a judge this year. I hope you enjoy the conversation and I'll see you afterwards. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, good to see you.
Yeah, very nice to see you, and thanks so much for accepting to do this interview with me. I'm very excited.
It's going to be fun, and I was going to say at the start, if you don't mind, it was fun coming upon this channel, looking for forward-related stuff, and seeing that someone had actually done a video where they were talking about the book. So that's great.
Thank you so much. I'm happy that you found the video because, yeah, it's hard sometimes you make videos and you don't know if anyone will find it or see it and if it will get any attention. So it's really nice. And you were one of the judges for the Forward Prize, weren't you?
Yeah, so there was myself, Jane Clark, Alicia Perhamed, and Vanessa Casilli, and Craig Charles this year doing the forward prizes. The process kind of started in January looking at poems and it ended about a month ago. So it's been a long old process, but it's quite nice to have it done now.
Yeah, well, that's a full year pretty much. How did you find it?
It was okay. It was what I thought it was going to be, which is a lot of work. It's not a proper like job, essentially. It's a kind of responsibility and a commitment to read a lot of books that you wouldn't otherwise read. And I think the reading was probably my least favorite part of it just because there was so much. But the best part was speaking to my fellow judges, which was really interesting. We had a lot of good conversations about poetry, about identity, and yeah, I'm just glad it all went well. And I'm glad, the people who were shortlisted were happy and the winners were obviously happy because you get a cash prize as well as the exposure. I don't know if you came to the event or not, or if you've been to any Forward or T.S. Eliot ceremonies before, but we had the prize giving in Durham and it was really, really good.
So how many books do you end up reading? Can you give us an idea?
I can't remember how many there were submitted. There must have been 300 maybe, but for the first stage, it gets put on a spreadsheet and 2 out of the 4 judges will read each book basically. And if someone likes that book, if they think it's something that, someone else might enjoy as well, it's worthy, it will get through to the next stage. Which a lot did, you can imagine. A lot of stuff maybe didn't get past that first cut, but still a lot of stuff did. And then once it gets to that stage, everyone reads everything, which is really cool because then you can read books that other people found really exciting and you get into conversations about them. And yeah, once we get past that initial kind of stage of everything being on a spreadsheet, it was a lot of fun.
Okay, that's super interesting. I'm going to be co-editing an issue of Magma, so I think we'll have a lot of reading as well, like a lot of poems being submitted, and I wonder what the process will be like of reading so much.
Is it a specific type of issue of Magma? Because I know they do themed issues.
Yeah, it's going to be ownership.
Oh, wow, cool.
Yeah, the call for paper is out at the moment. Call for poems. The window's open in November.
Who are you editing it with?
With Paul Stevenson and Kathy
It made me
Kim.
want to. Yeah, I saw your interview with Paul Stevenson. That was really good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
It made me want to buy that book. I haven't read The Hard Drive yet, so I'll definitely buy that.
Oh yeah, do. It's great. It's a really good book. So maybe you'd like to introduce yourself in just a few words.
Sure. So I'm a 38-year-old writer and disability rights activist, and I've had 3 collections published with Nine Arches Press, and I co-edited an anthology of work from disabled and deaf writers called Stares and Whispers in 2017.
And we're going to start with that anthology, actually. So here it is, Stares and Whispers. So you were co-editor for this project. How did the idea of this come about, and what is the importance of promoting these voices?
So I got interested very quickly into disability poetry because I'm disabled myself, my wife's disabled, and I guess when I was getting into poetry, I was interested, what are the kind of key disabled voices out there, or people writing from death experience or chronic illness? And there's a void, really, there's a big void. And in 2013, 2014, myself and some friends were kind of having conversations about doing an anthology, because even at that point, there hadn't been a major UK-based anthology. And really, we were taking inspiration from an American book called Beauty is a Verb, which was a very popular American anthology about disability and deaf poetry. And I spoke to Jane at Nine Arches, who I had a relationship with in terms of publishing, because she'd already published my first collection. And she was interested in doing this. And so it was myself, Sandra Allen, Harani Baraka, and Madeline Burnhope who originally started that anthology.
And it's quite a big book. I imagine you had a lot of submissions. How did you make sure you would reach the right people?
Yeah, we had a lot of submissions, and the usual thing happens with disability poetry. We had some submissions from people who weren't disabled but wanted to write in a disabled voice, or write through the experience of another person with disabilities. And it was difficult going through everything and working out how to get everything in the book and to make sure the quality was there. But I think we spoke with a lot of writers, and we talked about making it not just print, but actually having different modes of reading available. So there's links in the book for audio, and there's some poetry films as well that were made. And I think once we realized we could use different mediums, that really opened up the idea of the book for us. We spoke to a lot of people and a lot of poets who are now kind of bigger names, but who are maybe starting out at that point, people who maybe hadn't fully embraced the identity of disability, because it is an identity that comes societally with a lot of shame. Really, the kind of 2-3 years of editing and finding this work was really interesting and really, really powerful, and communicating with these people and interacting. Yeah, by the end of it, I'm really happy with the book. We still get kind of, on the royalty sheet, we still see it's getting shared and bought and photocopied in America and in different countries and things, and it's had a good impact. So yeah, we're really happy with it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we'll put the link to this anthology and other things we mention below in the description box. Now let's talk about your third collection, Single Window. I'd like to know how your poetry has evolved over time through your different projects and what inspired this particular collection.
So I had my 2012 debut, Absence Has a Weight of Its Own, and in my second book, I think I wanted to write more authentically from my own experience, but I wasn't completely comfortable doing that yet. And so there's kind of analogy and extended metaphor in that book. But then the third collection, Single Window, was more of a development from that in terms of getting more and more comfortable with actually writing very kind of sparsely and directly from experience. I knew by that point that I really wanted to represent disabled experience, and not just writing about disability, but writing through disability. So it's not just kind of writing about pain or writing about surgery. It's the idea that even in a poem about mold or a poem about having a shower, it's written through the lens of disability, and there's something in that experience that you can sense or you can take from it. But really, Single Window, it became apparent after a while that the experience I was writing from, which was roughly kind of about a year, that myself and my wife found really difficult. And we spent in a single room in the ground floor of our house because we couldn't make it up the stairs. This experience of being kind of isolated there was coming out in the work I was doing, and it seemed that it was a really apt thing to center a book around. So yeah, I think when I think about a book, and I am really kind of, I think, a writer of books now rather than a writer of single poems, it's the initial idea or the theme or the kind of single sentence description of what that book is that determines everything else. So Single Window was going to be a exploration of disability, intimacy, love through the lens of time and through the lens of the seasons to some extent. And once I had that, all the other things developmentally in terms of form, use of language, metaphor, description, all those other things kind of came and kind of found their place afterwards. But for me, it was about, in my third collection, really writing a book rather than writing a collection of single poems, like I say.
And as you say, the book moves through a whole year from autumn to summer. And that made me wonder, because I have an interest in poetic journals, were the poems written as some kind of poetic journals or poetic notes, or written more in retrospect when you knew what the book would be about?
Definitely a bit of both. For me, process is really important and practice is really important. And so I don't know about you, but I have notes on my phone that I'm constantly kind of adding to, and I use my laptop as well. So everything gets kind of pinned down by the date that happened. And because I was writing from this room looking outwards, a lot of the things that were coming to me in terms of images were based on that particular time of year anyway. So a lot of it is really kind of heavily defined by kind of journaling, but not in a really linear way. It takes me so long to write poetry that, you know, if I start writing a poem in spring, it's not going to be ready by the next spring, or sometimes the next spring after that. So some of this work had already been done in part, and some of it was kind of done retrospectively. So I could go back and say, more work has to be done over kind of January, February. And so I need to think more about kind of that winter period and what was happening and how I was feeling. But I'm lucky that there was a lot of material already there, because I tend to write everything down. There's this kind of fable in writing that if it's important, you remember it. And it's not true. It's not true at all. It has no relation to how much you remember anything at all. So I'm quite an avid note collector, and I'm always kind of jotting things down.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So when you write a note, is it already a poetic line, or is it more like a factual note about what's happening?
So I try not to distinguish anything I'm writing down with any kind of poetic frame at all. So I might naturally break the line just in terms of how it is on the iPhone to make it easy to read. But I've found over the years that the more naked I can make my note taking, the more potential is there left afterwards to mold the content into something that is more poetic. So I can think more about breaking the line, about changing an adjective for something else, but using a thesaurus and things like that. So I literally write down stuff that just comes to me in my head, and then I leave it so that when I end up actually drafting into something, it's there and I can do whatever I want with it. Because I found that if you kind of self-edit as you go along with the first instinct, the first ideas, it can push the work into a corner which can't then be taken out later, you know?
When I read Single Window, I thought the altered temporality of disability and illness was very present, and also the porousness of the body, and also the intimacy of care. What strikes me is that outwardly very little happened that year. As you said, you were just in a single room downstairs, and yet life is really rich with texture. So I wondered, did the language needed to write about this experience come easily to you? How did you get there?
That's a good question. I think for me, in this book anyway, the thing that really helped that language was the thing that you mentioned first of all, which was this idea of temporality. Because I feel like all of those poems kind of exist in stasis. They're not tied to anything moving or going on. They're not tied to current affairs. They're kind of in their own bubble, which we were. And this was before COVID as well, which kind of made everyone feel like they're in a bubble. Because of that, I felt like I had carte blanche in terms of language to really push things in different places, or go places I wouldn't before. But for me, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, once I have the idea of what I'm writing about, language choices, and I see language really as two ends of a piece of string, and one end is novelty and one end is accessibility in terms of the choices we make. In terms of thinking about those things, they have to work in relation to that main idea. And so with a book that is kind of written through time and about time and tied with it, there were so many different places I could go. And so it's nice to hear that the description is rich, because I think when you're chronically ill or when you are disabled, your experience of time and your isolation means that you have more space to kind of make those decisions and to push language in those places. And I think if I'd written about it in a way that wasn't quite so heavy on description and that wasn't quite so interested in compressing languages in some places, I don't think you would feel quite the sense of isolation and being outside of time as you hopefully do in the book. So that was a really big thing for me. And you mentioned porousness of the body as well. One of the kind of key ideas in disability studies is something called the body mind, is this idea that the split that we like to think we have between body and mind doesn't actually exist, and anything that affects your body has to be processed by your mind in some way, and anything that we think about is also taking place within our physical body. So there's no separation. And that was something I was really thinking about heavily when I was writing this. If I can make those descriptions porous, if I can cut the distance between the reader and the writer in that way, through bodily description or through the senses, then that's something that I find really interesting. That was something that I was heavily focused on in this book.
You also included pictures, so there's one here, for example. How did you come to that decision?
Yeah, that was quite a relatively late decision in the process, maybe. It was difficult for me because it's hard enough, like, being okay with the words that are in the book, you know, and I'm a writer. I'm still umming and ahhing over every decision. So to put photographs in there was a difficult thing. But I think in conversations with Jane at Nine Arches, I think we realized that in the same way that I was talking about description, we really had more space to play and to push things further with this book. And to have that feel of memoir about it, I think it was important to have those pictures. These are pictures that I've collected over my phone over that kind of year and a half anyway. They weren't going to be a part of any project or anything. They were just kind of things that I was cataloguing. But once we looked at them and we thought about how we could make them fit with the words and with the book as a whole, and we could make it cohesive, it seemed like something that was worth kind of exploring. And so I'm really happy with those pictures in there. I think we're seeing more of that in poetry now. I went to Waterstones the other day and they had Caleb Femi's latest collection that's also got pictures in it. His debut Pour had pictures in it as well. And I'm seeing publishers, especially in the UK, have a lot more space in books that are either images or kind of concrete poetry or poetry that's been manipulated in some way textually. I think it's something that's kind of more accepted now, but it was a bit of a scary choice, to be honest, because I didn't quite know whether doing that would possibly undercut the seriousness of what I was trying to write about.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. No, I don't think it does, because even though it's tangentially related to the things you are talking about, it's not an obvious relation. You know,
Yeah.
it's if you were trying to illustrate a poem with a picture, which would be a little, yeah, not as effective. But I think it adds to the collection. Would you recommend other collections or anthologies, maybe by disabled and chronically ill poets, that you think people should be reading?
Yeah, definitely. There's a video that myself and my wife did that's on YouTube where we recommend 5 books. So that I can definitely give you to put in the description if you're interested in that. But alongside that, and, you know, just in case anyone can't access that, Raymond Antrobus, I would say, is one of the more successful writers in the UK. His new book, I think, is shortlisted for the Eliot Prize this year. And he's always writing and working through the experience of deafness and doing it through the intersection of race as well, which is really interesting. So Raymond is always someone who I'd recommend. Polly Atkin is a writer who's had some books out recently that are fiction as well as poetry, and they're really good. And Betty Doyle is a writer who's got a second pamphlet coming out soon. And I think Betty writes about polycystic ovary syndrome and about a few different things really, really well. So really, it feels like there's a number of writers kind of having a moment now. And I think there's going to be a couple of big disability anthologies out next year as well, which will be really good. But also, like I mentioned earlier, Stairs and Whispers, but the American collection of poetry, Beauty is a Verb, is really, really good as well. I really highly recommend that.
Thanks so much. That's amazing. Could you read us a poem of your choice, please?
I can, yeah, sure. I typically read the same 2 or 3, especially now I'm kind of 3-4 years away from the book. And I don't know how you feel about your older work, Dan, but you get bored of reading the same ones occasionally. And you know that thing where you're at a reading and someone's reading from their book, but they're desperate to read their new poem at the end that's kind of a little bit more fun and a little bit more exciting to read. But this one I read now, The Beautiful, is almost like a manifesto in my eyes for disability and for some of the narratives around bodily performativity and ableness that we have in our society. So this is The Beautiful. White sheets contain us in the illusion of containment, and we don't screw like they do on TV. The Vaseline smeared lens groping bodies that gleam, the carefully placed sighs and glazed eyes of the beautiful, swimming through the windows of gyms and pools like torchlight, lonely as hell. They will never love like this, our whole bodies into the earth of each other. We bury ourselves like readers in books, take each other apart and put each other back again and again. Cripples love best because love is an assembly, and we've always been broken, gluing our lives with glitter and card in darkened rooms.
That's a beautiful poem. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
Is there anything else you would like to say that we haven't had a chance to talk about?
I'd be interested to talk to you more about anything you find interesting as well. I mean, going back to the Forward Prize video, because I can't remember, which book did you say you think would win?
Yeah, I thought Good Lord might win. I thought, well, this one is just so different from other poetry I've read, I guess. In a way, a cool new voice, if you want. It felt like that to me anyway. So I thought, oh, maybe they'll pick that one. Although, I mean, the winner is an amazing collection. So it was difficult because obviously all 5 were really excellent. But yeah, I had a feeling it might be Good Lord. I wasn't exactly surprised, actually, that Victoria Chang won. So, you know, it makes a lot of sense. Was there, I mean, I don't know if you're even allowed to talk about this. I was wondering, there must have been some disagreement to an extent on which one to pick at the end, or at least at first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was obvious that there was different taste, and I'm very stubborn about what I like and what I don't like, which is why I thought this process would be a lot more difficult than it was, but actually it turned out to be good. We had to all decide on something that we were happy with winning, and I hope that the writers feel this way as well. I think we feel that getting shortlisted is really, you can't really ask for any more than that. Out of all these hundreds of books, you get shortlisted, and it's very close. And there were 20 or 30 books that may have been in that top 5, depending on who the judges were and what their taste was. But to be shortlisted is really winning, and anything beyond that is a matter of even more subjective taste. The Victoria Chang book, I guess what I like about it winning as well is it's quite a quiet book, and it's not often that a quiet book wins. It's a book that kind of accumulates through the whole collection rather than having these kind of like single poem bangers. Do you know what I mean? And in the same way, Good Lord is not a book of single poems either. And I'm glad you like that. That's one of my favorites as well, obviously. And I don't know if you've read Ella Frears's debut collection, which is really, really good. Well, I really recommend that. Did you like God Complex?
Yeah, I did. I thought that was a potential winner as well. I think those 3, you know, seemed like one of them was going to win. I wasn't so sure about the other 2, even though they were good, that they were going to be prize winners. Yeah, God Complex was really good. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, God Complex is kind of very much speaks to my subjective tastes a lot. I found it quite like Anne Carson in a way in some of the descriptions, like really, really like high level. And then for me, again, as I'm in that kind of mode, to write a book of poetry rather than a book of poems is, I think, a really difficult thing to do. Whilst we're on the topic, have you read any of the T.S. Eliot's shortlist at all?
No, I haven't. I don't think I have. I haven't even looked at the shortlist very closely.
Will you do a video about that as well as the forwards?
I could.
I think that'd be really, really good.
When is the announcement?
Unlike the forwards, the Eliots do it over 2 nights, but it'll be January, I think. Over January, they'll have the first night, which will be a reading at South Bank, and then the second night when they actually give the prize.
I see, yeah, there are 10 shortlisted books. Yeah, that would be exciting. I mean, I could get in touch with them, maybe, see if they would send me some books for that.
I've got a contact there. I can help with that if that's helpful.
That would be amazing. Yeah, I would love that. That might conflict a little bit with my Magma reading, but we'll see how much I can get done.
No, that's good. That's good. There's a poet in there whose book was really well liked with the judges for the forwards this year. Peter Gizzi. Have you ever read any Peter Gizzi before?
I haven't, no.
So he's an American poet, and he's done a number of collections, but I think in the same way as Victoria Chang, he's just now getting exposure in the UK. But his collection is Fierce Elegy, and it's very different from a lot of contemporary poetry. So I really recommend that.
Thanks. So thanks so much for coming on Poetology and talking about this.
Thank you, and I can't wait to see more of your videos.
I hope you had a good time listening to this interview. We've listed all of the relevant links below. Please look at the video that Daniel suggested and check out his social media. Please feel free to share any comments or questions as well. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video very soon. Bye.